For those of you who don't know, the 1918 flu is one of the greatest stories never told. For people who didn't live through it, the speed and the scale at which the disease devastated communities across the globe is nearly incomprehensible. Author Alfred Crosby explained, nothing else, no infection, no war, no famine, has ever killed so many people in such a short period of time. Modern estimates suggest about a third of the world's population contracted a clinically apparent dose of the flu between 1918 and 1919. And in this incredibly short period of time, anywhere between 50 and 100 million people died across the world. Just to give this a little bit of perspective, that's around the same number, if not more people than died in the entirety of World War II, or the AIDS epidemic, or the Black Plague. When the Spanish flu surfaced in the spring of 1918, it was a common flu, similar to what people get every year. It was uncomfortable, but it was survivable. But as the flu circled the globe, it mutated and became deadly. And there were two different, if you look here, there was a first sort of less deadly flu, and then when it came back around the first time, it became incredibly deadly. And then there was another similarly deadly outbreak several months later. The speed at which the flu attacked communities is also somewhat hard to believe. If you look close at the little, what seem to be black dots, those were the people that got infected in September of 1918. And if you look at sort of all of them combined, those are the people that were infected after October 5th of the same year. So it was incredibly fast. And in the United States alone, the flu killed 675,000 people. Now, the raw numbers alone are shocking, but it's the human element that makes the flu truly compelling. The easiest way to fully comprehend the flu is to put it into terms that we understand. Unlike most strains of the flu, the 1918 flu disproportionately killed young adults. The U-shaped curve, which means that the flu killed people who were very young and very old, is what most flus look like. The 1918 flu has a big hump between about 18 and 30, or 15 and 35 or 40. So for most of you in here, that's you. Which makes this more relevant is John Barry, who's an author of The Great Influenza, speculated that if the upper estimate of the death toll is true, as many as 8 to 10% of all young adults living then may have been killed by the virus. So not to be morbid, but look around. That's a lot of people. That's 1 out of every 10 people. And so when you think about that, it's easy to sort of look and think about it, but you really have to put it into your own perspective. So how many of you were at USC in 2009 during the swine flu / H1N1 outbreak? Anyone? Yes. Same virus. Comforting, I know. And if you've ever wondered why people were so concerned about H1N1 mutating and coming back, it's because that little hump that we saw in the last slide, that's what we got. But it never mutated. But there's always the possibility that it will. Now, what's significant about this is that when we think about ourselves as modern human beings, part of a modern era where science cures diseases all the time, and we have robots who do our cleaning, and we like to think we live in this futuristic age, it brings you down to earth when you think about the fact that we don't actually have the ability to cure the same strand of flu. So with that in mind, what's really interesting about the 1918 flu is that no one remembers it. How many of you had ever heard anything specific about the 1918 flu other than it existed prior to right now? Yes, we've got a couple. But when we put it into perspective of how devastating and how damaging it becomes particularly curious. But there are a lot of reasons why people speculate the 1918 flu wasn't remembered. John Barry described that it's never inspired awe, not in 1918 and not since, and not among citizens of any particular land or of citizens among the United States. Now, Barry speculates that one of the reasons is because while viral outbreaks and epidemics are increasingly less common, in 1918, people had memories of an incredible number of devastating illnesses. There are other historians have suggested other reasons. Another author suggests people write about war, they write about the Holocaust, they write about horrors that people inflict on other people. But we as a society, or we sort of as a global society, have a particularly strange habit of not recording memories of outside forces, of epidemics, of disasters. And so, but what was perhaps the most compelling reason why we don't remember the 1918 flu is fairly simple. It's World War I. This is just, glance at this, this is sort of what was going on in World War I at about the same time. If you look September, October, November, December, those were key years for the flu. And they were also key years for World War I. Now, the 1918 flu is also referred to as the Spanish flu. And the reason has actually nothing to do with Spain, but it has to do with the war. Because the Spanish media wasn't censoring their press the same way that countries across the world were censoring their press, because everyone wanted to appear strong and forceful and wanted to cover up any signs of weakness. But in Spain, the press wasn't as regulated. And so Spain was reporting about the flu before anyone else was. So it became the Spanish flu as a result of it. It actually originated in China. The Spanish flu is simply a cause of is related to the war. And so when we look at the war, it makes a lot of sense that people didn't really recall it, because one of the other reasons was people didn't have the same understanding of how enormous and how global it was that we do today. Because when press was censored, people knew that this was happening in devastating proportions in their own little communities, but didn't necessarily have the sort of understanding of how it was affecting the world. So the question now is why should we remember the flu? It's interesting. A lot of people died, but I think what's the most exciting reason to remember it, or most compelling reason, is a lot about what Jason talked about. It makes us aware of our own mortality. The flu could come back, and and it could be disastrous, and we don't really have anything to stop it. And so it makes you sort of reflect a little bit more upon, what it means to be human and what it means to be mortal. And I think that's a really significant fact. And when you take out the memory of the flu, as sort of history seems to have kind of erased it, you erase a really key memory that has both shaped world history and shaped American history, but also is elemental in us understanding what has happened to us as humans and what can in the future happen to us. So with that, reflect on your own mortality.